Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome to My Weight Live. We all want to be healthier in the new year, but it can be hard to know where to start. We're talking with dietitian Danielle Aldis about 20 tips on everything from food to sleep that will make 2020 your healthiest year yet. Stay with us. Danielle, it is such a pleasure to have you back on the show with us tonight.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So we have a lot to talk with you about, but before we get underway, I want to do our trivia question. Tonight's trivia question is pretty simple. True or false, the more specific you are when setting a goal, the more likely you are to accomplish it. A good one for the beginning of the year when we're trying to create and stick to our goals. So the more specific you are with setting a goal, the more likely you are to accomplish it. Is that true or false? Put your answer in the comments and you will get our awesome giveaway, which is a printable guide to the 20 tips that Danielle and I are going to be talking about tonight. And tell us where you're watching from in the comments. It's so cool to look at the comments and realize that people are watching the show all over the world, and we love to hear it. So Danielle, you're a dietitian. We all want to be healthy in the new year. What do you wish people knew when they were setting healthy eating goals?
I think the thing that I wish most is that people realize that they have a lot of knowledge and capacity already. So very often when I sit down to chat with somebody, they feel like they have to just forget everything they already know and do and start with something completely different. And I really do think that we have a lot of good habits and practices that we already know and do, but maybe they're a little bit jumbled. So, it's finding a way to bring them into a cohesive set and put them into practice a little bit more effectively.
So I really like that idea of almost like building on our strengths rather than feeling like, I don't know where to start. I don't know what I know that's true, but really believing that, we do have some good things in place and it's just a matter of amplifying those.
Exactly. It doesn't mean you have to jump from what you're doing and find that diet that is the right one to embark on in January. And certainly there's no shortage of that type of thing when you do a quick search on the internet.
That's for sure.
But, I think it's being a little bit more reflective on what are you already doing that's working for you, and where can we find the opportunities for improvement in and around that will help you to continue to move towards a successful overall strategy.
Oh, I love that. Okay, as we're talking, folks, tell us what your goal is for 2020. We love to hear what your goals are, and it's also been proven that writing down your goals means you're more likely to stick with them. So get in the comments here, tell us what you're trying to accomplish, and do what Danielle says. Think about how you're building on something you're already doing well. All right, so Danielle, tip number 1 is something we've heard from basically every weight loss expert we've talked with, and including you, and that's keep a food journal. Talk about why keeping a food journal can be so helpful to people.
A food journal is really an opportunity to take a deeper dive and look a little bit more closely at what you're doing. And so, again, building on that concept of there's probably lots of things that you're doing well, it's an opportunity for us to take a look at what's already working, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of people look at a food journal as an opportunity to be very critical. Where are all the bad things I'm doing, or what are all the things I'm doing wrong? But I think, to borrow a phrase from Arthur Ashe, we want people to start where they are, to use what they have, and do what they can. So we're really looking to sort of take that journaling approach and find a way to see what's working well, because we don't need to change that.
Right.
And look at the opportunities for improvement in and around that. So it's really an opportunity for you to pat yourself on the back a bit for the things you already do well.
Right.
But focus your attention on the areas that could use improvement.
So I can already tell our theme for this episode, and I hope for 2020, is going to be positivity. So focusing on what's working and building on that rather than beating ourselves up for the things that we aren't necessarily happy about.
Exactly.
And folks, have you tried using a food journal or an app in the past? Tell me yes or no in the comments. I'm really curious to hear. But Danielle, for those folks who are saying no in the comments, how might someone get started with a food journal or a food recording app if they've never used one before?
I think so. When we look at journaling, there's no prescribed method of how to or must do's with
Okay.
journaling.
Mm-hmm.
What we know is that people who use some sort of an awareness tool do better than those that don't.
Okay.
In fact, even recently, there was a study done that looked at apps, and they found that people who didn't even always complete their full day of journaling, but at least recorded 2 of their eating episodes most days, did better than people who didn't. So again, I think it's finding a tool that's going to work for you.
Mm-hmm.
If you're the pen and paper person and you're trying to force yourself to use an app, it may not work, right?
Right.
So make the tool work for you.
Conversely, if you're always on your phone, you don't want to think that a pen and paper is going to be the way to go. So be aware of kind of what your current setup is.
Exactly. I think classically, too, we think about journaling as the food record,
Mm-hmm.
what and how much did I eat?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a role for that kind of journaling. And certainly the apps are great. Food journaling apps are great for that kind of thing. And they can give you a lot of detail, especially if you are working with a dietitian or other health professional.
Mm-hmm.
You can get some really good detail about what you do and your nutrients and all of that. But it may not be what and how much that you need to focus on. It might be when or why you're eating. So, think a little bit broader about your journaling too. It could be something that's more about kind of thoughts and emotions or circumstances, or tuning into particular times where you're experiencing some challenging eating.
Okay, I think I love everything about that. I think all of that is so important because I think sometimes you're right. We think of it as just what we ate and when, but there really can be so many other aspects that can contribute to what we eat and when and why, and being able to capture that is helpful. I've never heard anyone else say that even doing some of it is better than none, that even people who recorded a couple of meals each day had better results than those who didn't do anything. So I think it's easy to get caught in the all or nothing trap. Like, if I don't do it perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all. But what I hear you say is even just kind of setting the intention of recording some of our meals is a positive.
Exactly. I think I've used this phrase several times already today in my clinic that, we're looking for progress, not perfection. So even if you've touched base with your food journal once or twice today or a couple of times over the week, that's better than nothing. We want to think about it as an opportunity just to inspect a little bit of what we're doing. There is a phrase that says we can't expect what we don't inspect. And so...
Wow, I've never heard that before. That's great.
That's attributed to Arthur, Deming is the last name. Arthur, I think, is not the first. But anyway, essentially, with weight in particular, we have high expectations of the outcome of weight loss. But it's important to understand that that's not really something we can control.
Yes.
And what we can control is the process, the actions, the behaviors that we take on a regular basis. So our journal is more about helping us to shape those actions and behaviors and find where we may be deviating off of our structure and routine and get ourselves back on track.
Okay, so speaking of kind of where we deviate from our usual routine, tip number 4 of our 20 tips is to set up your environment for success. And one of my absolute favorite videos of all the ones we've created is one of you talking about how important our environment is. So tell us now, why does our environment determine so much of what we eat, kind of regardless of our best intentions?
I think because, a lot of our routines are just that. They're habit, they're routine. We're really responding to things in our environment in ways that are subconscious, ways that our brain has been, our brain has ways of being efficient so that we don't have to pay full attention to things all the time, and we can direct that attention in other places.
We're almost designed to put it on autopilot, sort of.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And especially when we're looking to change what we do, it's important to find ways to get it out of autopilot and make an intentional choice instead. So when you can set up your environment such that you're not being cued to do things in your routine way, and that you have to engage in that active choice, that allows us to be moving in a better direction, generally speaking.
And I think also that speaks to, what you were saying. So much of our eating is just automatic. And so when our environment reflects a lot of unhealthy choices and it's easy to make an unhealthy choice, that tends to be what we do. Whereas, in the video, you actually talk about thinking through all of the environments that we live in, our office, our home, even our car, and thinking about how we can make the healthy choice the easier choice.
Exactly. We also talk a lot about, people will come in to discuss change and they'd say, look, I just don't have the willpower. And we don't. Or if we do, it's a very limited resource.
And so that's not a personal failing. That's just reality.
And it's not abnormal. So we're really trying to make the healthier choice, the healthier behavior, the easy one so that you can be on autopilot, but that autopilot is directing you in a positive direction.
So we usually think of environment as a place, but environment really includes all the food cues that can trigger us to eat, whether it's commercials on TV or, when I take a break at work, I usually have a coffee and donut. Talk about those cues in our environment, maybe even some that we're not even aware of, and how they can trigger us to eat in ways we're not even aware of.
So, and this speaks to kind of our learned behaviors, right? So again, our brain has scripts that kind of behave like a bit of a chain of actions or a chain of behaviors, and A leads to B, which leads to C, and so on.
Right.
And so anywhere along that chain, if we take an opportunity to redirect it, move it in a different direction, change the cue in our environment, it can help to lead to a different behavior. So, for example, I've got a client who struggles with picking up takeout through the drive-thru on the way home. And one of the strategies he's found helpful at times is just to change his route. So he drives home a different way.
Oh, wow.
Alternatively, he will pack a snack in his lunch that he will use to eat before he leaves his office. So that he's satisfying any hunger. And when his mind says, let's go through the drive-thru, he can say, he can counter that thought with, I'm not hungry, I just had my snack. So it's, again, sort of building on that conversation and changing up the cues and thinking a little bit differently about what we do. It can also be, too, like the time of, you mentioned the time of day, like your coffee break, that coffee might be connected to a pastry. A certain day of the week. We had this conversation in clinic yesterday, and one gentleman said, yeah, Friday is pizza, so can we change that up a little bit? Like if you've always ordered a pizza on Friday night for a long time, it's going to seem automatic to do that. So your environment can be lots of different things. Sometimes it's a person, you probably maybe over the holidays experienced that when you got together with a certain friend or family member, you didn't eat or behave as well around them as you might have with somebody else. So it could be people, places, times.
Well, even this is a kind of a silly example, but my husband and I just started watching the British baking show and we love it. And I've told everyone I know this, but I deliberately do not let myself eat during that show because I don't want to associate watching that show with having a certain snack, because I've had it happen so many times where if you just a couple of times do something, your brain starts associating that activity, whatever it is, with that tasty food. And it's crazy how quickly that connection can get established. And same with people in our lives. Oh, I always meet them at Starbucks and we usually get this. And so you think about that person and you immediately start wanting that food.
We've had people describe that, they've gone to the same coffee shop for so many years and they've come to the realization that, their coffee is maybe providing them more calories than their breakfast is. And so they look to change up their coffee order. But the staff knows them so well that they're often pouring their coffee as they're
as they walk in the door.
In the line. Yeah. So they've had to work with those people to say, look, I'm doing things a little differently, and here's how. So can you support me?
Oh, that's great. All right. Tip number 5 is probably the most important at this time of year when we're all gung-ho, and that's to allow ourselves some wiggle room. So kind of to plan in some treats so we don't get caught in the all or nothing trap. How do you encourage the people that you work with? Because that's a delicate balance, right? You don't want to feel deprived, but you don't want to go overboard too. How do you encourage people to walk that tightrope?
So here's where we can tie together a few of the threads we've been talking about. It's very individual. And you could use your journal to maybe give you some insight as to how it's going to work best for you. We very much talk about an 80-20 kind of approach because well, one, that gives us some freedom to understand that we don't have to be perfect. And so if we're trying to make progress, we're not looking for perfection. It's okay when, occasionally you decide to have a less healthy choice. And in fact, we're trying to move ourselves more towards using food to fuel our body and less to be a comfort and entertainment and all of those things. But that's not to say that it can't equally be those things from time to time. So It's just trying to have a bit of a balance. So I think this is where you have to sort of know yourself and see what's going to work well for you. If you keep it in the house, availability is a big predictor of what you're going to eat. So the more available it is to you, the more likely you're going to be eating it. But, and so some of my clients will say there are a couple of foods that I don't keep in my house anymore, so that I won't eat them as often as I might have otherwise. But when I go out, I don't feel guilty, or it's not a taboo thing for me to share something. So let's say it was a pie. I've got a client who's a real pie fan, and she just said, look, I don't keep pie in the house anymore. But when we go out, I will order a slice of pie and I enjoy it. I sit and I savor it. And sometimes I'll give my dining partner a fork to share a bite too.
So finding that balance between, this is something I enjoy and I'm going to figure out how I can enjoy it without perhaps keeping it in the house where I'm always tempted.
Yeah. I've got another family who I work with that they really like to have some chips in a movie. But, if they keep bigger bags of chips in the house, then they find themselves nibbling at them too often and it gets in the way. So they, as a group, they'll stop at the store and just get their own favorite individual sized bag of chips the night that they're going to do a movie at home. And so that, again, it's in your house, but you're doing it in a way that it's contained in its portion and not likely to extend beyond the event that you're planning it for.
I love it. All right, folks, we have an awesome PDF that you can print out and get all of these 20 tips that we're talking about with Danielle. And you will get it if you answer our trivia question. So in case you missed our trivia question earlier, here it is again. True or false, the more specific you are when setting a goal, the more likely you are to accomplish that. Put true or false in the comments, and regardless whether you're right or not, you will get that awesome guide of 20 tips. So one of our tips about food, Danielle, relates to eating mindfully. And I know you've talked about how eating mindfully can help us become more aware of when we're actually satisfied. Talk about how someone can start eating more mindfully.
I think one of the things that is helpful is just to, when you eat, try to just eat. So really working on reducing the distracted type of eating. So if we can take a break from what we're doing and bring our attention to the food that we're nourishing ourselves with, that's probably step one in the mindful eating process. Slowing it down, pacing ourselves a little bit with our eating, engaging all of our senses. And I've done mindful eating exercises in some of my programs with clients. One night in particular, we did it with some dried apple pieces, and which are crunchy. So we started passing around the little basket of dried apple pieces, and from behind me, I hear crunch, 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 and I forgot to tell the group, don't eat this just yet. We're going to do something interesting with this in terms of mindful eating. And so I said, oh, would you like another? Because I'd like this to be a process and you to follow along. And anyway, we had a good laugh about how it's so hard to eat mindfully. You put something in front of us and boom, it goes right in the mouth.
Well, talk about the brain and just that, putting it on autopilot. It is so easy to get into just that, that hand to mouth with chips or whatever, where you're just eating without even recognizing that that's happening.
Exactly. So if you can we talk about eating with our eyes, if you can purposely eat with your eyes, so engage that sense of sight first. A couple of my clients will say that they try to describe their food to themselves just briefly, like 2 or 3 adjectives that aren't taste because it's not in their mouth yet, but how it looks, maybe how it smells, if there's any sound, or a memory or a connection. So,
like
3 words that just sort of get us to pause and be a little bit more mindful before we pop it in our mouth.
So we did an episode recently with Michael Vallis, a psychologist who's just a wonderful human being, very knowledgeable. And he was talking about how being aware that the first 20% of our bites of something give us 80% of the enjoyment. And I thought that was so true. And it's something you really notice when you're being mindful, that the first few bites of a dessert or the first few sips of a glass of wine, those are really kind of like the most enjoyable. So you really want to pay attention there. And then it kind of gives you the ability to kind of notice, oh, I'm getting more full, or gosh, I'm not getting the same charge out of this that I was at the beginning. Is that something you've talked to clients about as well?
Absolutely. So I think when we talk satisfied by our meals, which one of the ways we ask people to think differently is to consider when they are feeling satisfied as opposed to full, and working to try to have that just right amount on their plate that will lead them to satisfied as opposed to full, because we do tend to keep eating whatever's on our plate. So sometimes we overeat past that satisfied. But yeah, I think we're not just our feeling of the stomach being satisfied, but if we can really use all of our senses to help us have a broader sense of satisfaction from our meals and snacks. That's, I think, what we can look to mindful eating to help us with, is that, we're wanting to be grateful for the food that we have. We want to consider why we're choosing it. Is it something that I'm choosing because I want the comfort of that, or that I'm looking for the nourishment and fuel from that? And there are times when both of those are appropriate.
And so just, again, being aware of what you're eating and why.
Yeah, exactly. And that maybe we can reach that satisfaction with a smaller amount than what we might have otherwise done before.
So going back to the beginning when you were talking about building on the positivity, another one of our tips is choosing goals that are positive rather than negative. And what I mean by that is choosing, I'm going to maybe try 5 new vegetables that I've never tried before, rather than I'm not going to eat donuts for the rest of the year. Psychologist Dana Lee Bagley says one of the keys to succeeding is to pick a do instead goal. So instead of having ice cream after dinner tonight, maybe I'll have some herbal tea. What are some of your favorite do instead goals, and how do you encourage people to kind of turn a negative goal into a positive goal?
This is important because I think we talk a lot about how our brain is a bit like a 2-year-old at times, and that we're trying to sort of adult a little bit more when it comes to some of these choices, and engage our executive functioning, that thing that says, no, we probably shouldn't. So I like this kind of a concept. And so you might swap, as you said, in some more vegetables, or maybe you're looking at having legumes, like plant-based protein, once or twice a week for your chicken or meat. Maybe you tend to eat out at lunch most days of the week. So maybe your do instead goal is, instead of saying I'm not going to eat out at lunch, maybe it's I'm going to pack my lunch 2 days a week. Maybe it's fruit first. So if I'm having a sweet craving, I'm going to include a piece of fruit first and then reconsider.
I like that.
Maybe if dinner time is a challenge, if it seems to fall apart in that transition from work to dinner or day to evening, maybe it's prep ahead a bit. So one of the things that I do on a fairly regular basis, and I encourage my clients to do, is before you do tonight's dishes, maybe do a bit of prep work for tomorrow night's dinner, so that you're always a little bit ahead. And so you're actually cooking dinner after dinner. Instead of cooking dinner and then eating, you can come home and eat, because you get it prepped the night before, and then cook tomorrow night's dinner, or at least get it chopped and prepped.
Okay, so that was actually going to be the next tip I wanted to talk with you about, which is planning. But actually, prep, I've never heard anyone suggest, cooking dinner before you start doing the dishes, kind of cooking dinner for the next night. That is a great suggestion, because it's so much easier when you get home to think, well, I've already got it halfway done. I'm ahead of the game. Talk about why planning is so important. And it's so interesting to me, the people that we've talked with who've been really successful on their journey with weight, they all plan and stick to the plan.
They even plan their non-planned things sometimes.
Yes, exactly.
Today is off the record.
Why does planning help, and how do you encourage people to think about what they want to start planning and kind of build on that planning?
I think planning helps because of all the reasons we talked about of why it's difficult, because we tend to get on autopilot. We have a lot of things to think about and juggle. Willpower is a fleeting resource. So if we don't have ourselves set up with a plan, then we tend to drift and we tend to sort of go along with the go with the flow, so to speak. And the flow of our world today tends to be towards higher calorie, less nutrient dense. And so planning is really, really important. We really want to try to make sure that, the easy choice is, or the healthier path is the easier path. So.
And so much of the time in our world today, the easier path is not at all the healthier path.
Exactly.
And so planning kind of reverse engineers that a little bit.
Correct. Yeah. And so you can, again, kind of slide into the healthier path. We, at our clinic, a couple of different program options that we have does use some meal replacements. And it's very interesting to me that the people who are using some meal replacements will talk about how I don't have to think about food quite so much. I don't have to, it's not monopolizing as much of my time, and I can be more effective in maybe following through on some of my exercise intentions or my get to bed earlier intentions. And I think it doesn't have to be meal replacements that do that for us. If we have the structure of our meals figured out a little bit ahead, 2 or 3 days ahead, then we're utilizing that concept of reducing the decisions that we have to make in the moment.
And we're also just lessening the mental real estate that we're dedicating to, because I think sometimes that's the biggest challenge. All right, 2 last questions for you. One, I'm just curious, what do you tell people to prep ahead of time? Do you encourage them to maybe chop up some onions? And I'm more asking for myself than anyone else.
Yeah, I think if you can cut your veggies up and have them ready to go for your dishes, and in fact, even just have them there for snackability is a good idea. So prepping veggies so that they're ready to eat, and fruit for that matter. Maybe doing some marinating of things or assembling of some things. A lot of busy families will take advantage of the slow cookers and Instapots and that type of cook technology where you can kind of fill it and forget it. And one of the things that is a good trick is, the crock or the cooking pot. If you fill that up with your ingredients the night before, then in the morning, you just have to take that out and put it in your slow cooker base. So it's going to go in the fridge once it's filled up.
Right. Yes, for sure. Food safety. Yes.
Yeah. But now it's just ready to drop into that slow cooker. I've had conversations with people saying, well, I don't have time in the morning to even just fill that thing up. So that's okay. Do it the night before.
Right.
And when you get a little bit more leeway, and then drop it in. Or, in my house, I have the advantage of a couple of teens that come home earlier after school than I get there. So if that Instapot, inner pot is ready to go, they can just pop it in, lock it on, press the button, and dinner's ready for the rest of the family when we need to make that quick turnaround.
That's fantastic. All right. One of our most important suggestions for the new year is to get the professional help and support you need. And Danielle, you work at Leaf Weight Management Center in Ottawa, which is really on the cutting edge of medical professionals treating obesity as a disease. I know you see people succeeding and thriving every day. What would you say to someone who isn't sure whether seeking out medical help is right for them?
I think it's a great question because a lot of times people have not always been received with the best of responses from their healthcare professionals if they try to broach the topic of weight, or maybe they have felt that wasn't a concern for them at a time, and yet a healthcare professional was sort of making that part of the agenda when they didn't want it to be. So it's important. I think what we are learning more and more is that weight is complex and it is a chronic medical condition. So there's a lot of things that happen in our body that regulate our weight that are not fully under our control. We can do things like we've been talking about with diet and exercise and sleep and stress management, all of those foundational lifestyle strategies. But that may be limited in terms of fully treating the medical condition that is weight. So
Right.
that's where I think it's important to touch base with a healthcare professional to maybe also access the next steps of are there some medical tools or resources that will help you, much like if you had diabetes and you're doing all of the things to manage your diet and exercise and lifestyle, and yet your blood sugars are still not as well controlled. With weight, it's tricky though, because it's, blood sugars perhaps maybe respond a little bit more to what we do with diet and exercise than weight always will.
That's right.
So I think it's also about keeping some perspective on coaching you in doing the things that are important for keeping you healthy, even if the weight isn't the best marker of the impact, the positive impact of all the efforts you're making.
Well, I think, Danielle, you and Dr. Shao and everyone at Leaf is just such a great example of kind of the positive, supportive medical support that's out there. And folks, if you're curious to see, what clinic or physician might be near you who specializes in treating weight as a chronic disease, we will put a link to our clinic locator where you can put in your zip code and see what comes up near you. But I can tell you, having talked to a lot of medical professionals and specialists in this, that can really make all the difference, because really getting a personalized evaluation, understanding what's driving your specific condition, it just makes such a difference.
And I think when you're working with somebody who's willing to help keep you accountable, sometimes that's our friends and peers, but sometimes it's also somebody who is has an unbiased perspective in terms of how they can really coach you, but challenge you at times too, and help you to consider the broad spectrum of things that may be helpful in your journey.
I think it's Dr. Ali Zentner, who's also a medical professional who focuses on obesity. She says, you're the expert on your body, and I'm the expert on obesity as a disease. And so this is a partnership. We're going to figure this out together. And I think that attitude is really what a lot of specialists today are focusing on. So Danielle, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. I'm inspired. I feel like a healthier 2020 is a lot more doable right now. So thank you.
You're welcome. It's been my pleasure.
Folks, the answer to our trivia question is true. If you write a goal down, you are more likely to accomplish it. So all the more reason to be really deliberate and be really specific in what you do. I hope you've enjoyed the show. We will be back with you at the end of the month for My Weight Live chat to talk about which of these 20 tips you've tried, how you're doing, what you've learned, and more. I hope you've enjoyed the show, everybody. We will be back at the end of the month. Talk soon. Good night.